All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Classic Comics Trek Talk live stream, where I take a look at one of the episodes of the original Star Trek series, both the making of the episode and behind the scenes information. So today we're going to be taking a look at the Empath. This is episode 63 in production order. And this is I don't think this is a favorite episode for many people, but watching it, it was better, I guess, than I thought maybe, or I remembered it being. Okay, so we got some folks here. Hello to everyone. Hail, Lord Thoth. Thank you for being here, sir. Always good to see you. Gwagnar, we got Gwagnar as well. Good to see you, Gwagnar. And Rogues1138. Hello, sir. Thank you for being here once again. Do appreciate it. I love having you here. Okay, so originally I was gonna do this week was I was gonna take a look at the Axanar fan film, but as you may or may not know, it's been yanked from YouTube because Paramount has filed, some sort of breach of contract. Basically, they're arguing that the film violates the agreement they made previously with the makers of Axanar. Because when they were making the original Axanar film and they were working on it like a decade ago, they took him to the court then and they hammered out some kind of agreement. And now they're arguing that the makers of Axanar have violated that agreement. And of course, the makers of Axanar are saying, no, we didn't. Who knows where this is going to go? I don't know. So anyway, I wound up just go ahead and just take a look at this episode instead. Now, there is supposed to be another Axanar fan film coming out later this year, so hopefully somewhere towards the end of the year, maybe I'll take a look at both of them and just kind of review both. We'll see how it all goes. But time is just kind of at a premium for me right now. I'm just kind of busy, so this was the easiest thing to do. All right, so yeah, Empath. Again, not really, I think one of the most fondly remembered episodes. The main thing I remembered was just, how it looked like it was kind of like a stage play. There was very little in the way of sets. It's all just in this big dark room, on what's obviously a sound stage, And it always looked, it's one of the episodes I think a lot of people would point to say, how cheap the show was, or at least it was in the third season. It actually initially Star Trek was a pretty generously budgeted show when it first started, but there were budget cuts after the first season, and then of course more budget cuts after the third season, and so by this season, yeah, they were really kind of scraping by and trying to do things as cheaply as possible. And Rogue asks, are empaths real? Yeah, I don't know. It probably depends on how you define them. There are probably some people who would argue that they are. It's kind of like asking, are psychics real? Like, I don't know. I'd say I'm skeptical, but who knows? Okay, well, let's just go ahead and dig into this one, shall we? All right, so we start out with the Enterprise orbiting a planet in the Manarian system, and they are here to evacuate a research team that has been studying this system's star because the star is showing signs of going nova, right? And the research team has not responded to their communications, and so Spock, McCoy, and Kirk beam down to the research station, and then they go in and they find the place seemingly abandoned, arguably for some time. There's a lot of dust and stuff like that. They get a call from Scotty. Scotty warns them that there is a massive solar flare that is about to strike the planet. And Spock says that the magnitude of the flare suggests it will take it about 72 hours or 3 days for the flare to subside. And Kirk tells Scotty to move the Enterprise to a safe distance while they try to determine what happened to the research team. So then they observe some computer records and they show the research team is working, but then they hear some kind of high pitched noise. And then one by one, they disappear. And then just as soon as they finish watching the video, then they also hear this noise. And then Spock disappears and McCoy disappears. And eventually Kirk vanishes as well. And this episode written by Joyce Musquette and directed by John Ehrman. So they awaken in what appears to be some kind of dark void. And Spock's tricorder indicates that they're deep beneath the surface of the planet. And then Spock detects a life form nearby. So they travel to go check it out. They approach and they find this sort of bed. I'm not sure. I guess you'd call it a bed. And they find this, what appears to be a young woman lying unconscious on the bed, or asleep at least. So she awakens, and Kirk asks if she's responsible for bringing them here. She doesn't answer. And McCoy scans her and tells Kirk that she's mute, and she appears to have no vocal cords. And he speculates that this is normal for her species, that she isn't a human who's had her vocal cords removed, or it's like some genetic defect or something. And Kirk wonders how they're going to communicate with her, and again asks if she knows how they got here, and she seems not to really understand the question. And then McCoy suggests that they will have to give her a name of some sort, and so he decides to call her Jim. Now, then these guys appear, and Kirk tries to introduce himself, but the aliens say that they know who he is. And Kirk asks why they have brought the three of them there, and the aliens say they are Vians. And I'm sorry, Vians. I think it's Vians. And they warn Kirk and the others not to interfere. It's like, dude, you brought us here. I mean, we wouldn't interfere if you hadn't brought us here. Uh, yeah, low budget, definitely. Um, and I always thought that that was because of the diminished budgets in the third season, and they had just gone real cheap with this episode. But when I get into the backstage or back behind the scenes making of it, that's actually not what it was. This was actually intended by the writer of the episode to look like this. This was actually what she had intended. So it just turned out that way. Um, Let me see. Let me go back. Yeah. So Kirk starts to approach him, and they zap him with these, hand weapons they have. Then Kirk tells them, he pulls his phaser and tells them that they have a rule against interfering with other cultures. Of course, Kirk in particular, that kind of rule. It's like, there's a lot of wiggle room. And Lord Thaw says, this episode was banned on television for years. Was it? I didn't know that. I remember watching it as a kid in the 70s. Was it because of the torture? Is that what it was? I would imagine that might be the reason. Was it banned here in the States or was it banned somewhere else, like maybe in the UK or something? Okay, so anyway, Kirk says, "Yeah, look, we don't want to interfere, but we will defend ourselves." And then the aliens zap away their phasers. I mean, these these gadgets they have just do whatever you need. Oh, it was in North America. Okay. Hmm. Let's see. Now, then they trap Kirk, Spock, and McCoy in this energy field here, and then they scan the girl with their devices, and then they vanish. And Kirk and the others are freed from the force field, and they check on the girl, and she awakens, and then she sees Kirk has this cut on his forehead here. So then she reaches out and touches his forehead, and his wound heals, it vanishes. But then it appears on her forehead momentarily before it again disappears. And Rogue says, you don't remember this one? Okay. I wonder when was it banned because I'm sure I saw this as a kid. I don't know. Maybe I'm remembering it wrong. I guess it could be possible, but I'm pretty sure I did. Maybe it's what is it, the stri- butterfly effect thing or whatever. I don't know. Where you remember something incorrectly. Okay. Now McCoy speculates that the girl Jim is an empath. That she's highly sensitive to emotional states. Hence the name of the episode, of course. Then Spock says that he detects some objects nearby, and so they go to investigate. So they walk across the sound stage, and they find several pieces of technology. And then they find the research team who seem to be frozen inside some sort of containment tubes. And then they notice three more tubes that have their own names on them. And then one of the Vians appear and tells them that they're right on schedule. And Kirk says that they found the research team dead, and the aliens say that it was their own imperfections that killed them. And then he says that time is running out for Kirk and the others, and Kirk tells him, well, all our time is running out, and then starts to tell him about the sun going nova. And then while Kirk is distracting him, Spock nerve pinches the guy, and they take his hand weapon. Spock then scans and detects what appears to be a passageway out, and so they depart. But as they're walking away, we see the Vians, including the one that was nerve pinched, who is now awake again, seemingly not really unharmed. Maybe he was just pretending to be unconscious. And so they make it back to the surface, but there's a fierce storm, and the Enterprise isn't responding when Kirk calls them. So they head for the research station. And as they approach it, they see Scotty. with a couple of red shirts. So Spock and McCoy head towards them, but then Kirk sees that the Vians are observing them, and he tells Jim to go with the others. Then he goes after the Vians, but they zap him again, and he kind of goes into slow motion, is what it seems like. Now, as Kirk and Spock are approaching the research station, Scotty and the red shirts disappear, apparently being just some kind of illusion. And so Kirk is still trying to get to the vines. Again, he's like in this trapped in slow motion or something. And the vines say that these humans, their will to survive is strong, and so they'll be suitable test subjects. Now, Jim finds Spock and McCoy, and she brings them back to Kirk. And after they find him, the Vians tell them that they only need one specimen for testing, and that Kirk will come with them, but the others can leave. Now, Kirk agrees to this, but of course, Spock and McCoy protest, but Kirk overrides them and tells them to leave. But before they can leave, the Vians zap them and they vanish. And then Kirk demands to know what happened to his people, and then they zap him unconscious. Now, back on the Enterprise, Sulu tells Scotty that it's going to be about another 17 hours before they can approach the planet due to the solar flare. Back on the planet, Kirk is being tortured by the Vians, and I'm guessing this is probably what caused the ban. Was these sort of torture scenes? And he asks what they want from him, and they tell him that humans are too primitive to have any information that they would find useful. So apparently they're just torturing him, for like amusement, it seems. And Kirk asks if this is what they did to the research team, and the Vians say that their own fears killed them. I don't know, man. Seems like seems like you're the ones who were doing it. So Kirk asks what they want from him, and they reply that they've already observed passion and love, and now they want Kirk to display courage for them so that they can observe it and study it. And then they zap him again to torture him, and then they observe the effect that the torture is having on Jim, who is observing all this. Now, meanwhile, Spock and McCoy have found their way back to the chamber they were in underground, but now they can't find Kirk and can't find the way out. Then Jim and Kirk appear. Um, okay, let me hold on. There we go. Oh, did I do? Hold on. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so Kirk and Jim appear. And then Jim heals Kirk, who's got these wounds on his wrist. And I got to say, I think the makeup on the wounds on the wrist it's really well done. That looks pretty real to me. I was impressed by how good it looked. But she heals him, and his wounds disappear. Then Kirk tells them about the aliens wanting to know something, but he doesn't know what it is. Then Kirk suggests that he may be able to study the Vian's hand weapon and learn how it works and then rewire it so it'll work for them, and then they can use it to get out of there. Then the Vians reappear and they tell Kirk that he must choose the next test subject. Well, I thought you only needed one test subject, dude. That's what you said before. So you can't believe anything these guys say. And Kirk refuses to cooperate and tells them but they tell him that if he chooses McCoy, there's an 80% chance that McCoy will die. Now he could choose Spock, and Spock will probably survive. But if he survives, there's about a 93% chance that he'll suffer a permanent brain damage. So not much of a choice. So then Spock and McCoy bicker about who should be the Vian's next victim, but Kirk insists that he'll make that decision if it becomes necessary. Now, he's having some after effects from the torture. McCoy likens it to, what do you call it, nitrogen narcosis. You know, when you get the bends, when you go diving and you get the nitrogen bubbles like in your joints and your blood and stuff. So he gives Kirk a shot without really telling Kirk. He just sort of zaps him without him knowing, which seems, ethically kind of questionable. But anyway, he gives Kirk the shot, and that puts Kirk unconscious. And of course, once Kirk is unconscious, then Spock observes that, well, since Kirk's unconscious, now he's the one in command, and so he'll be the one making the decision on who's the Vian's next victim is. And of course, he says, I'll be the next victim. And then, while he's distracted, McCoy gives him a shot too. And I really like this scene. Spock's, taken quite by surprise as he says, that was a very unethical act, Doctor. And he's kind of right. I mean, it's, being in the medical field myself, just sticking people because you want to, and giving them shots. That's, it's not really the way it's supposed to be done. There's supposed to be some consent involved, and you would think this far in the future that would be certainly would be emphasized. But anyway, he gives Spock a sedative and knocks him out, and of course then the Vians show up, and McCoy tells them that he'll be the next test subject. He tells Jim to take care of Spock and Kirk, and then he leaves with them. And of course, they string him up just like they had strung up Kirk and start torturing him. Now, Kirk and Spock eventually wake up, and Spock observes that the device is actually controlled by a person's thoughts. And in order to operate it, he'll have to adjust it to respond to brain waves. And he says, of course, I'm the only one, I can only adjust it to my brain waves because somehow he knows his brain waves or something. So basically, he'll have to operate the device once he rewires it. And of course, then Kirk and Spock wonder why the Vians had let them keep it because they were unconscious. The Vians could have taken this device back if they wanted, but they let them keep it. And of course, it kind of plays into the idea that the Vians are just kind of, they're doing what the Vians want in one way or another. And Rogues says the Vians remind me of the Telosians from the Cage episode. Yeah, I agree. I had the same thought. I think there's a number of similarities with the Cage in this episode. Because in both, again, you've got these kind of, big brain aliens who are part of a dying race, basically the last of their kind on a dying planet, and they're abducting people, humans in this case, and basically performing elaborate behavioral experiments on them to kind of study them. Now, of course, in the Cage, it was to see if they would be good, basically as breeding stock. That's not what they're doing here, but there are a lot of similarities. Let's see. And Spock speculates that the Vians likely know that they are intelligent enough to tinker with it and get it working and use it to escape. And so the logical conclusion is that the Vians want them to use this thing to leave, which would mean abandoning McCoy, of course. And they also agree that Jim is clearly an important part of their plan, whatever it is. Then Spock gets the device working and says, we can use this to basically get out of here, or we can go get McCoy. And of course, Kirk says, let's go get McCoy. So they return to that lab area and they find McCoy, who is severely wounded. He's been thoroughly tortured by the Vians. They scan him, and he has multiple internal injuries like fluid in his lungs, heart damage, ruptured liver, et cetera, et cetera. And upshot is he's dying. He's in bad shape. And they wonder if Jim could heal him and save him. But before they can ask her, the Vians appear and trap them in the force field again. telling them that there will be no interference. And Spock says that they must know that their sun is about to go nova soon and their planet is going to die. And they say that yes, they know, and that is why they are performing these tests. Kirk and Spock demand to know what is going on and why they're doing this. And the Vians reveal that, again, their race is basically dead. They can't save them. But there are other inhabited planets in this system. I forget how they say. I think they say maybe five or something like that. Five inhabited planets. And they can only save one of them. And how they can save them is not clear. But they say they can only save one. And they've brought Jim, who is from one of these planets, here. And basically, they're conducting these experiments as a behavioral test to see if Jim's people on her planet are worthy of surviving. And basically wondering if they can learn compassion is really the upshot of it. And if she can learn this lesson, then the Vians will save her people. And then Jim approaches McCoy and heals him, or at least she attempts to. She heals him somewhat. But, because they basically set her up to die because his wounds are so severe that really, in order to, because she kind of absorbs the injuries and the wounds. And if she absorbs them completely, she's going to die herself. And she comes up like close to the point of death and then stops and kind of passes out. And the Vians are like, well, this experiment's a failure because she didn't sacrifice herself, basically. Now, meanwhile, Spock realizes that the force fields are powered by emotion somehow. And of course, being Spock, he's able to kind of shut off his emotions to the point that the force field goes away. Then he's able to disarm the other Vine and take the other weapon. So now they have both of them. But the Vians say that they're not going to do anything that will prevent what is happening, even though Kirk and Spock demand that they do. And Kirk says that Jim has saved McCoy to the point of dying herself, and they have their answer, and they should let them all go. But they say that going to the point of death isn't enough, implying again that really only her sacrificing herself and dying herself would be sufficient. Kirk offers them their weapons back, but they say that doesn't matter as it doesn't change anything. And then Kirk insists that they won't leave McCoy or her behind, and then he accuses them of being incapable of understanding the emotions they're studying. Because again, they're wanting her to display compassion and mercy and all this, but they're showing none themselves, and that they no longer feel that they're basically just intellect now. And this sort of talking to that Kirk gives them seems to have an impact. And so they use their gadget to heal McCoy and save him. And then they take Jim and then they float away, float away, float away. And then later, back on the Enterprise, they're talking. And of course, McCoy in particular is keen to point out that it was the experiment was all about emotion and the importance of emotion, particularly compassion and mercy and all that. And as he says, and a lot of other foolish human emotions, and how do you feel about that, Spock? That the Vians, who were so advanced and technologically and so intelligent, thought that emotions were important. And of course, Spock isn't too pleased with McCoy's trolling. And the episode ends there. And so this one, like I'll give it a C plus. I think it's not as bad as I remember, but it's definitely not one of the better episodes. It's just a bit dull, honestly. It's a bit slow, and there's just not a whole lot that happens. Or at least that's how it feels. I mean, actually, I think there is some stuff, like particularly with them being abducted and tortured, but it feels kind of like there's not much going on. Okay. And Rogue says, I watched the episode today, very enjoyable due to human nature's need for survival. Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, as far as, I don't know. I mean, I find it because the whole thing is, well, we want her to show compassion for others, but being an empath and therefore being able to sense what other people feel, you think that would really lend her to being compassionate anyway, wouldn't you? You know, if she can sense other people's fears and their pain and stuff like that, it just seems like she would be compassionate pretty much anyway and wouldn't really, isn't something she would need to learn. It would be something almost, just like second nature to her, I would think. All right. So this is from an NBC press release issued on November 12th, 1968. Aliens decree death for Captain Kirk, Spock, and Dr. McCoy in a bizarre experiment in which humans are used as guinea pigs on Star Trek, Friday, December 6th. Katherine Hayes guest stars as Jim, a beautiful but silent girl capable of absorbing pain from others, who is a victim of the laboratory experiment also. Kirk discovers two test tubes containing the bodies of the men he is seeking. Dr. McCoy, in an attempt to save Kirk and Spock, volunteers to be the first to die. Guests are Alan Bergman as Lal and Willard Sage as Thand, the aliens in charge of the merciless experiments. Jason Wingreen as Dr. Lincoln, Davis Roberts as Dr. Ozaba, the objects of Kirk's search. And Rogue says intuitive. Yeah, I mean, you think that was just something that would be kind of intuitive to her. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I mean, it would just be something that her senses would just lend her to. And it's like saying someone with eyes needs to learn to be observant. Well, wouldn't they do that already? It's just like instinctive. Okay, so there is a backstory here. With the sun and a solar system about to go nova, the Enterprise arrives to rescue the two-man scientific team from the uninhabited world. Not expecting trouble, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy beam down alone, but the scientists are dead, their bodies deep underground, preserved in specimen tubes. The three Enterprise men are abducted and now serve as new specimens for the cruel and unexplained experimentation. Jim, the mute empath, is the crux for the men's suffering. She has been brought here from another world to be tested by the intellectually advanced but emotionally vacant Vians, so they may determine if her race is worthy of salvation. The theme is one of empathy, the prime ingredient, as the Vians call it, when one creature is willing to subject itself to pain and even death to spare another from suffering. More important, how the act of self sacrifice can be taught through example. So, The Empath is an offbeat tale, even by Star Trek standards. While the story sometimes feels as sparse as the setting, this profound drama, accented by so much darkness and suffering, delivers an enlightening message. Jim never speaks, but the talents of guest performer Katherine Hayes bring her to life. Both actress and character prove themselves worthy of being admired, cherished, and remembered. The script also provides chances for our three lead actors to shine in this offbeat morality play. Shatner, Nimoy, and Kelly must certainly have been delighted. Although we had seen Spock and McCoy compete to see who would sacrifice himself to save the others in The Immunity Syndrome, the battle of wills and the intent behind it are much more fully realized here. There are many touching moments, especially as we witness Jim's reaction to the selfless friendship between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. Writer Joyce Musket, a fan of the series, proves she knew the three principals well. Arthur Singer and Fred Freiberger, handling the script polishing, also showed clear indication that they now had a good understanding of the characters. With these characters in the format and agenda that was the series, a type of magic takes place. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy teach Jim about the greatest potential of humanity and how it can be realized, the tendency of some to think of others before thinking of themselves, just as Star Trek taught its young audience the same lesson week after week. The Empath is not an action-packed adventure, but it may just touch your heart. Okay, so as mentioned, this is written by Joyce Musket. So in 1967, Joyce Musket was fresh out of Cal State Berkeley, where she had studied journalism and theater arts, and was splitting her time working as a reporter for a Berkeley newspaper and moonlighting with a local theater. For the latter, she had been apprenticing in wardrobe and set design for playwright and producer Robert Fisher, who was responsible for the 1965 smash stage play The Impossible Years. Fisher had also experience as a television writer and producer, having created and produced Mickey Rooney's 1964 sitcom Mickey, and serving as a writer on Desilu's series The Mothers-in-Law. Musket, who had just tried her hand at writing a television script, asked Fisher if he would give her his opinion. The script, which was titled The Answerer at that time, was for an episode of Star Trek. Musket, in an interview for this book, recalls, quote, I got the idea from the science fiction novel and also probably the film When Worlds Collide. Published in 1933, When Worlds Collide told the story of the discovery that a gigantic planet from another solar system had drifted out of its orbit and was on a collision course with Earth. The scientific communities joined together to build a pair of experimental rocket ships in hopes of taking as many people as possible off of Earth before the destruction. But who will choose the survivors and by which standards? That is one of the novel's great questions, and it's one echoed by Musket in her otherwise dissimilar tale. And I think the movie was in the 50s, like late 50s, mid 50s. I actually watched it maybe earlier this year. Wasn't that long ago. I think it was maybe back like in the winter. Musket was further inspired after reading about an ancient custom of inviting a person to speak on the behalf of another who is being judged. Basically, an early version of a character witness, and this person was known as an answerer. Rogue says this episode was never banned in North America. It was banned by the UK, by the BBC, for psychological and physical torture of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. Okay. See, that's kind of what I thought, because I know there are several TV episodes, that have been from American shows that have been banned over there for one reason or another. Maybe it was both. I don't know. Okay, and Guagnar says When Worlds Collide was 1951. Okay, see, I would have guessed like around 55, 55 or 54. Okay, so Mascat said, quote, it's an Egyptian concept, that the answerer, that is an Egyptian concept where a person goes to a judge and says, I answer for this person. And the person he is answering for gets punishment or reward based on the answers that are given. In my story, Jim, in a way, answers for Spock and McCoy when they are injured. She wants to save them. She's afraid to risk her own life to do it, but wants to save them because she realizes that the interactions between these men are valuable. She discovers that she empathizes with them, and empathy, to my way of thinking, is perhaps the greatest of human qualities. Okay, now there was something else Musket wanted to accomplish with her script. She said, quote, I wrote it so it would be shot on a sort of surreal set, one that would be somewhat bare, which is, certainly what we get is there in this kind of void. So it was really meant to be this way. The bare sets aren't the result of the low budgets. That's actually how she wanted. She wanted it to have a kind of surreal look, like because again, she had a background in stage plays, and I suspect that that's just kind of how she wrote it more like a stage play because that's was what was familiar to her. Usually on Star Trek, there was so much stuff going on in the background, blinking lights, sound effects, people moving around, but I wanted this to be focused on the characters without all those distractions. I had been training in theater where the sets had been kept simple and understated. The lighting would be on the characters, center stage. Your attention stays on them, and that's how I approach this, almost like a stage play, with only a few characters on a somewhat bare stage. Robert Fisher liked what he read enough to ask Musket if she wanted him to act on her behalf as an agent, but she thought he was joking and nothing more was said of it at the time. Now, sometime later, Fisher offered Musket further work with his theatrical company, which was moving from LA to New York, or actually from San Francisco to New York, I think. To mount the stage production he had been testing in front of small audiences in Berkeley. But she declined the offer to remain in California, continuing to work for the newspaper and further practice at writing scripts for TV. She said, quote, I remember I wrote an episode of I Spy and had it sent off for someone to read, probably just mailed it to the studio in Los Angeles. Now, there is a degree of irony in this, in that Musket had chosen to write her second spec script for a series expected to be around for a few more years. I Spy, in fact, had been such a big hit for the past 3 seasons that NBC was prepared to give it an unprecedented 2 year pickup instead of the standard 1 year renewal. But in late February of 1968, just as protest letters were pouring in demanding that Star Trek be renewed, NBC announced that I Spy would not be getting renewed. The behind the locked doors cause for the sudden cancellation was a contract dispute between executive producer Sheldon Leonard and NBC president Mort Werner. And this unexpected opening in the network's primetime schedule enabled Star Trek to get a last minute reprieve. Musket's I Spy script would never be read, but her Star Trek script was now had a chance. All right, hold on. Okay, sorry, my phone was going off. Okay, Guagnar says, I wonder if the minimalistic set was influenced by the Outer Limits episode Nightmare. Funny you should ask, Guagnar, because I'll be getting that in a minute because, yes, it was, in a way. But yeah, I'll get into that here in a few minutes. Okay. So yeah, so it's interesting because in this book they reveal that um, it was, at least in part, it was I Spy being suddenly canceled when it was intended to be renewed instead, that left this sudden hole in the schedule for NBC, and that is at least in part why Star Trek got this third season. And it makes you wonder, if this hadn't happened, would the letter writing campaign have worked? If I Spy had continued on and taken a slot, then they wouldn't have needed Star Trek. Would they have then brought it back anyway, or would they have just let it die despite all the letter writing? It's an interesting argument, because that whole thing of the fans writing in and saving the show, that is such a big part of the lore of Star Trek and of the lore of Star Trek's fandom and all that. I mean, it's the original writing campaign. No one had done that before, and we've seen similar stuff play out over the years, and it's invariably when you see it, I think the obvious reference is to Star Trek. But it'd be interesting if it turns out that was never really the case and it was going to be canceled anyway. But it was really this sudden opening due to the cancellation of I Spy that really saved Star Trek and brought it back. Okay, okay, here we go. So it was about 6 months after Robert Fisher went to New York that I got a call from the William Morris Agency, Musket said. The person on the phone asked if I was Joyce Musket and said he was really pleased to be able to speak with me. He said he had a purchase offer on something I'd written. And I remember thinking, I just sold my first script, and I thought he was calling me about the I Spy script. Musket was unaware that Bob Fisher had taken her Star Trek spec script to his agent at William Morris, and that because Fisher was such a powerhouse in entertainment, the answerer was then sent on to the Star Trek offices without question. Nor could she have known that the William Morris Agency was the biggest and most prestigious talent house in Hollywood at this time, and this assured that if nothing else, someone at Star Trek would read the script. Musket said, quote, I was surprised when the agent told me it was the answerer, that he had a purchase order. I had no idea that that had even been sent out. Musket remembered, I went into Paramount and Arthur Singer gave me the parameters concerning what they wanted to keep and what they wanted changed. Maybe go back to her, yeah, her name there. And how to present that in an outline form. He also asked me if I wanted him to take me down to the set and watch them filming the show. At the time, I said, no, thank you. I'm interested in the script I'm writing, and I'm worried that there will be a dichotomy between the actors and their characters. I want to stay focused on the characters, so no, I won't at this time, but after I finish the script, I'd very much like to meet them all. Musket was asked to write a proper outline that could be sent to NBC, modifying the story structure based on input from the producers. On April 24th, Freiberger wrote to Gene Roddenberry, quote, Joyce Musket sent entire script of The Answerer in on spec. Both you and Bob read it, and we were all in agreement that it had promise. If her outline shows equal promise, we are a giant step toward having another complete teleplay before preparation date. Musket's outline, dated April 26, arrived a few days later. Roddenberry told Freiberger, quote, I would be frankly worried sending this story to script as it now stands. My copy is dated April 26, and I'm not sure whether this is the original or Singer's rewrite. This version, though, is too full of unexplained things and departs from our Star Trek format in that the sheer number of items which have no scientific or even speculative scientific basis creates a fantasy feeling. Some of this fantasy feeling, or more accurately, surrealistic feeling, was intentional. In Musket's original story, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are kept in jail cells. The setting was in keeping with a sparsely decorated stage, which was surreal or dreamlike even, though not as stark as what was eventually filmed. Roddenberry wanted Freiberger to know that Kellum DeForest's research would need to scrutinize the script even more so than usual. And of course, DeForest Research being the group that would go over the scripts and basically sort of vet them for scientific accuracy or scientific feasibility, that sort of thing. Now, again, there's some memos that sent back and forth and some rewrites done. I'm not going to go into every step because it would get a bit tedious. Arthur Singer's revised outline came on May 7th, Arthur Singer being the story editor for the show. Singer had increased the danger elements and created a growing need for the theme of self sacrifice. Also changed was the ending. Now Kirk would become proactive and plead for the lives of Jim and her people. And Singer, well aware of Musket's theme, one of empathy, gave the story a new title, changing it from The Answerer to The Empath. NBC approved the story and Musket was sent to script. It might seem odd that Freiberger would entrust a script assignment with a novice writer who needed help in putting together a presentable outline. But he felt that Musket's spec script had shown enough talent and vision to gamble on her. He also believed this unique story belonged in the hands of a woman writer. And since she was not a member of the Writers Guild, Star Trek would be saving money. And lastly, the story had been received with great enthusiasm from Gene Roddenberry. And remember, as I covered in previous episodes for this third season, they were trying to really, you know, even then, sort of, put more emphasis on female viewers and do more to try and bring in women to watch the show because they felt that, we really aren't going to get any more male viewers at this point. Roddenberry was happy to know that another woman writer was working for Star Trek, and he was pleased to see the script in development. Like Joyce Musket, he believed that empathy is one of the greatest traits of mankind. It was empathy that had led Roddenberry in the early 50s, when he was a Los Angeles police officer, to use his service revolver to end the life of a dog that was suffering after being hit by a car. With the go ahead to proceed to script, Musket was given further instruction as to how to shape her teleplay. Quote, there was a lot they wanted changed, Musket said, but the essential story remained intact. They were mainly concerned about the last few scenes, so I said, okay, I'll change those. And I didn't mind because I cared about what the story involved with Jim, and they didn't ask me to change that. Musket's first draft teleplay arrived in early June. She had included two passages from the Bible, serving as bookends to her script, which Freiberg allowed to stay in. Uh, yeah, and the first of them is here where Dr. Ozaba, this guy, he says, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a or no, that's not it. I'm sorry. Where is it? Um, yeah, he says, in his hands are the deep places of the earth, the heights of the mountains are his also. And that, that also kind of echoes Tolkien in a way, because Tolkien, I'm pretty sure there's a line in when they're in Moria, I think, or somewhere in Fellowship of the Ring where Gandalf says something about, about the deep places of the earth, the deep places of the world, or something like that. And then at the end of the episode, when they're, during the denouement, Scotty compares Jim, the empath, to a pearl of great price. And again, this is from a passage, Matthew chapter 13, verse 45, 46. The passage reads, quote, "Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a merchant man seeking goodly pearls, who, when he had found one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it." And that's from the New International Version of the New King James Bible. So Musket said, quote, "I reworked the script at their direction, but I was late 2 or 3 days in sending it in, and then I didn't hear from them for what seemed like forever. I hoped being late didn't have them lose interest because I never knew what they liked about that script in the first place. I didn't know that they were having budget problems, and that might have been part of why they were interested. But I do remember waiting a long time to hear back." Musket didn't know that every draft of every story outline and script was sent to all members of the creative staff at Star Trek, who then took anywhere from a few days to a week to send in their notes. The wait this time was longer because Roddenberry had expressed concerns about the lack of scientific accuracy in Musket's story outline. Freiberger decided it would be worthwhile to send the writer's first draft to Kellum DeForest Research for coverage. DeForest passed it off to their usual team, Joan Pierce and Peter Sloman, who, besides catching poor use of science and scientific theory, made suggestions which influenced the design of the production. Regarding the plant descriptions as, quote, "a desolate landscape under a gray sky," they wrote back, "The light from a pre-nova sun should be quite red. This might make for interesting variations in visual presentation on this planet's surface." Matt might be interested in this, Matt being Matt Jeffries. And he was interested, and so was the cinematographer Jerry Finnerman. The planet was made to look desert like, hot, and uninviting as Finnerman painted the sky with orange lighting. Rogue says you can find a bit of Tolkien in everything. It does pop up a lot, but I mean, again, I think it's less. It was, I think, Tolkien drawing from the Bible in that case. I mean, because he was a religious guy, and he has said, I think, that he did take more than a little inspiration from the Bible, with like Frodo being analogous to Jesus in some ways. But yeah, like I know J. Michael Straczynski in Babylon 5. I know he drew quite a bit from Lord of the Rings, and that's setting aside all the fantasy writers that aped Tolkien to some degree or another over a couple of generations. So 3 weeks after Musket had sent in her script, she finally got a call from Arthur Singer. Now, he did want changes. These included, so in the first draft where Kirk, Spock, and McCoy and Jim make their escape, they see the illusions. So initially, let me see here. Oh, that's the wrong one. Hold on here. Okay. So when they come outside and they see what appears to be Scotty and a couple of red shirts. So originally that was supposed to be Scotty, Uhura, and Chekhov. But in order to save money, they changed that to just Scotty and a couple of red shirts. And then in an earlier draft, McCoy, when he was being tortured, he was actually strapped to a chair. But for later drafts, he is shown hanging from chains, just like Kirk was. Also, for the first draft, Jim saves McCoy at the end. This was changed to have Jim try to save him but fail, and this failure on Jim's part created an opportunity for Kirk to argue for her survival, further engaging the concept Muscat had originally found in her inspiration, that one character becomes an answerer for another. And Rogue says borrowed or stolen up for interpretation. Yeah. Um, I know what is it the saying, good writers they borrow from if you're going to borrow from the best or steal from the best or something like that. And just not make it obvious. But yeah, like Straczynski, like I know there's in somewhere in it, I think it's in Fellowship of the Ring, but I'm not sure. But I think there's a line where I think it's Gandalf is talking about Saruman, I think, and he has a line of something about trifle not with wizards, for they are subtle and quick to anger, or something like that. And that exact line, there's an episode of Babylon 5. It's the one with the technomancers in it, where Michael Ansara, who's playing a technomancer, he uses that exact same line. He says the exact same line, or at least it's really close. And also, I always thought that the shadow vessels, they always kind of reminded me of Nazgul in a way. Okay, so Musket sent in her second draft script on June 21st. Freiberger accepted it as fulfillment of her contract and sent it to the Mimeo department for formatting, creating the June 24th yellow cover first draft. Arthur Singer then took over, contributing a final draft from July 22nd. Then Freiberger went to work creating a revised final draft, delivering it to NBC in three increments on July 23rd, 24th, and 25th. Sending in a rewrite of a script to the network in segments like this was unusual, and it only happened once before from DC Fontana when she did a rewrite of The Ultimate Computer. But that was late in the second season when the creative staff was always trying to beat the clock. This was still fairly early in the third season, and Freiberger and Singer were already down to the wire, so far behind that the last act of his revised final draft was sent to NBC for approval the day the Empath started shooting. Is there no truth in if okay, I'm getting so if the episode Is There in Truth No Beauty hadn't been a day late in finishing, these pages would have arrived at that network a day after production had started. Fortunately, NBC had no substantial problems with the script other than asking that the instances of torture be minimized and the wounds not be too graphic. Oh, yeah, is that the episode? Yeah, Geometry of Shadows? Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Guagnar. Okay, so a change took place during Freiberger's rewriting, or another change took place, and that was the shortening of the script. The revised final draft had been whittled down to under 60 pages to ensure that nothing was filmed that would not make it into the episode. Money was becoming very tight for the show. Responding to more notes from NBC, in particular from broadcast standards regarding the violence in the episode, Freiberger ran the script through his typewriter again for a set of page revisions from July 29th to August 1st, as the episode was filming. Some of these changes were also made to appease the cast. Yeah, so we'll get into that because some of the cast members had issues with the script. Let me take a drink. Assignment of this season, and the upcoming episode for The World Is Hollow and I've Touched the Sky was to be his fourth. But after signing the contract, Alan of Troyes went one day over schedule, and his second episode, The Enterprise Incident, although shot in 6 days, went into overtime more than once. Uh, Going nearly 3 hours into overtime. Despite Lucas having served as a series producer, director, and writer, Freiberger felt he could best appease the front office, run by Paramount's Douglas Kramer, by finding someone with a reputation for filming fast. So Lucas was given the boot. While preparing the production, Robert Justman was quick to see that the Empath had a few things in common with an episode of The Outer Limits that he had worked on as associate producer, which was called Nightmares. Oh, and Mr. Anthemos. Am I saying that right? Mr. Anthemos 112. Hello, sir. Says, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, but my journey got off to a bumpy start. My babysitter made me watch this in 1984. I was 7, and this was the first episode I ever saw. I was bored to tears. Yeah, it's not the most gripping episode, but thank you for being here, sir. It's good to meet you. So as Wagner had said earlier, mentioned earlier, this episode has a lot in common with a episode of The Outer Limits called Nightmare. So in that story, Earth is at war with an alien world where humans are being brutally interrogated by horrific-looking aliens, and the alien compound was described and best served by minimalistic sets, much like here. Justman thought it would be a good idea to hire the director of Nightmare and ask him to use a similar approach here. So they got the director of that Outer Limits episode, John Ehrman. John Ehrman, in a conversation with this author, recalled, quote, both of those shows, Nightmare and the Empath, were done the way they were for pragmatic reasons. Other episodes had gone way over budget and they were really trying to economize. I know that was the case on The Outer Limits because I was also involved as an associate producer on that show. They had spent too much money on several other episodes and they were trying to cut back, and that was how Nightmare happened. And I got the feeling that was how the Star Trek one happened too. And he was basically right. Ehrman, besides directing Nightmare and serving as associate producer on numerous other episodes of The Outer Limits, had directed 12 episodes of the sci-fi show My Favorite Martian. But he was not a science fiction enthusiast himself. Ehrman preferred working on more straightforward dramas like Peyton Place and Marcus Welby, MD, where he felt he had more creative input. The director said of Star Trek, quote, frankly, I knew the show was a big hit. I just didn't care about it. It wasn't anything that I got personally involved with. Seems to me I knew that it was a good career step. It was a successful show, you know. In those days, I didn't have a lot to say about what I would do. You just kind of got booked. Your agent would call and say, you're going to do 3 episodes of this, 4 episodes of that. And you go, okay, fine. But this show was not something that I had any real strong feeling about. And Rogue says, obvious they were on a tight budget. Yeah, yeah, and that is one of the things that kind of dogs the show during this final season. Ehrman, however, did have a real feeling for Robert Justman and said, quote, I really loved him. And if you knew him as a young man, you knew how special he was because he was funny and charming and hardworking, all the things I suppose he was his whole life. He was a great first assistant. He worked as a first assistant to Ehrman on the shows Stony Brook and The Outer Limits. And people like that are few and far between. Whatever he dealt with, he gave his whole soul to. And for me, that was evident right from the beginning on those first couple of shows I did. John Dwyer, Star Trek's set decorator, shared this opinion, saying, quote, I consider Bob Justman one of the best production people I knew in the world. In 42 years of running around, I never met anybody better, that's for sure. And he's a bit of a genius, especially a production genius. He did so much on that show. The man would make it go. Gene would come in every once in a while and say something, but Bobby was the one who really made that show operate on a day-to-day basis. And Matt Jeffries always used to say, if you need anything answered, yes or no, then go to Gene, and then go to Bob for the real answer. But that was always the case. Gene had a lot of other irons going in the fire. John Ehrman also appreciated the support from Fred Freiberger and Star Trek associate producer Eddie Milkis. Despite contradictory statements from director Mark Daniels about Fred Freiberger, Ehrman said, quote, Freddie was a good guy. I had worked with him on Ben Casey as well. He was a very literate, hardworking guy. The other one I remember very fondly, other than Bobby Justman, was Eddie Milkis. I remember that he was an enormous help to me with the special effects. He really took me down a path and gave me input that was very helpful in pre-production. I was happy that he went on to have so much success. Well, John John Erman felt restricted in many ways. He nonetheless made a substantial contribution to the Empath in suggesting who should play the role of Jim. The success of the episode would rise or fall with this casting. Ehrman immediately knew who he wanted. He said, quote, I recommended Catherine for the part because I had been a casting director at 20th Century Fox before getting into production, and I used her on some of the shows when I was still doing that. She was a great girl and somebody who had a reputation for being a beautiful face, but also wanting to be more than that. She wanted to do the best she could. Let me get a good picture of her. There you go. And Rogue says, for me in the 70s at age 7, any TV show with aliens was fascinating, but I can see how you were bored. Yeah, and actually, after learning that, it doesn't surprise me because this does feel like a Twilight episode in some ways, like these aliens, the Vians or Vians or whatever they're called. I mean, they feel very much like they're out of a Twilight Zone episode, don't they? They have that kind of look to them. Okay, so Catherine Hayes, who proved Ehrman right with her sensitive and startling performance as Jim, turned 32 during the second day of production. She had worked in TV since 1962 and appeared more than once on Alfred Hitchcock, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and Bonanza. She was also featured in an episode of The Naked City, which was written by Gene Roddenberry. He had been so impressed with her performance in that he considered her for a recurring role in The Lieutenant. That role never materialized, but she did appear in one episode. For an interview conducted shortly before being hired for Star Trek, Hayes said, quote, I'd love to do any part that I could stretch and be considered a good actress. She would get it with this role. As for the casting of the two Vians, go back to them. There we go. Ehrman admitted a couple of those other guest actors were friends of mine. That's what you were able to do, suggest people that you liked working with. And usually the producers were glad of that because it gave them other options from the ones they'd been hearing about week after week or month after month. Willard Sage was one such pal. And I think, honestly, I'm not sure which is which. They've got pictures of the actors here in the book without the makeup on, but I'm not entirely sure which is which. I think I think that's William Sage there, maybe. Um, and so the two aliens, their names are Lal and Than. Their names are never used in the episode though, so I'm not sure again which is which entirely. But Ehrman and Justman both like the idea of casting William Sage as Than because he actually was in the Nightmare episode as well. He played one of the aliens in that episode too. And so they thought he'd fit this well. Sage had scores of credit in TV at the time. The series he frequented the most included Gunsmoke, Branded, Bonanza, and Hogan's Heroes, with numerous episodes of each show. And the other alien was played by Alan Bergman. I think this is him, playing the other Vian named Lal. He was featured prominently from this same time in episodes of Bonanza, The Wild Wild West, The Rat Patrol, and Run for Your Life. And for that reason, Bergman was not thrilled with the idea of doing the empath. He says, quote, I was called in by director John Erman to do Star Trek, but the part sounded very limited. It was basically appearing in grotesque makeup, and that disturbed me. So I declined. John urged me to do it and promised to beef up the part, and with much reluctance, I agreed to do it. Jason Wingreen played Dr. Link. And that's the guy. That's the one here in the orange onesie. Um, let's see. He was 46 and he made hundreds of appearances in TV and film during the 1950s, 60s, continuing up into the mid 90s. He was in 3 episodes of The Twilight Zone and 3 episodes of The Outer Limits, including The Expanding Human in 1964, in which he appeared alongside James Doohan. He had been a regular in the 1966 series The Long Hot Summer as playing the town doctor and would go on to have recurring roles on Archie Bunker's Place and Matlock. Davis Roberts played the other scientist. He's the one in the pink, I guess. Dr. Ozaba. He's the one who quotes the Bible. He was 50 and worked often in TV and films between the late 40s and early 90s. The one in the pink looks familiar. You recognize him? Yeah, he probably appeared on, like it says here, he probably appeared on another show or several other shows on TV at the time, I would imagine. Okay, interviewed shortly before the Empath commenced production, DeForest Kelley said, quote, a new role is a challenge. A new real life situation is a challenge. Life itself is a challenge, and by taking the unknown and working at finding the answers, well, if I can turn the page here, one grows as a human being. Nothing can survive if it becomes static. Even McCoy, he keeps growing each week as I find out more about him, and each new discovery and revelation is like getting a mental shower that clears the cobwebs away. This episode presented many challenges to the actor. It also touched him deeply. McCoy would cite the Empath as being his favorite Star Trek episode. Oh, and RTNZ is here. Classic. I love you, mate, but I found this episode tedious. Not my favorite TOL. Well, dude, that's what I said at the beginning. I said pretty much the same thing. It's. I think it's better than I remember it being, but yeah, it's a bit slow. But thank you for being here, though, man. Appreciate it. Let's see. Where was I? Okay, yeah, so Leonard Nimoy had been playing Spock cooler this season, and this episode serves as a prime example of that. Interviewed during a break in filming on the set by writer Digby Dial, Nimoy shared his thinking regarding the subtle changes. He said, quote, Spock understands the trauma of human existence, for he is not at home with Earthmen or Vulcans. He can function only in the fabricated and neatly ordered society of the Enterprise. There he knows who he is. He relates to his role very specifically, and this gives him a kind of coolness. In spite of being an outcast, being mixed up, looking different, he maintains his point of view. He can't be bullied or put upon. He's freaky with dignity. There are very few characters who have had that kind of pride, cool, and ability to lay it out and just walk away. And Humphrey Bogart played most of them. With so few regular cast members needed, only three guest players, and minimal sets, the Empath seemed an economic venture. But it would end up costing a lot more than anyone had expected. Okay, so filming began on Thursday, July 25th, 1968. Everything was ready except for the series leads. The production notes for this day tell how time was lost as the production or producer, that's Fred Freiberger, was called down to the set by the director to discuss script problems with the actors. And RTNZ says, cheers at Rogues and everyone, regardless of the episode. No doubt Classic will have a lot of interesting things to say about Trek in general. Well, I hope so. I hope they're interesting. Okay. Um, yeah. So basically, the on the first day of filming, production was delayed for a while because basically it put down to Shatner and Nimoy. There were elements of the script they didn't like and they wanted changed, and so they had to delay filming. John Ehrman said, quote, it doesn't truly surprise me that that happened with those two guys because they were trying to exert their power over everybody. It wasn't just with me, it was with Gene and Freddie and everyone else. They knew their characters, so when you had an idea, they would simply say, oh no, my character wouldn't do that. They just didn't want to hear from you. Ehrman didn't recall DeForest Kelley being difficult, but the production notes from this day indicate that yes, Kelley did indeed add his voice to the descent. Quote, we're all vitally concerned, all three of us are, with this show and the scripts, Kelley told Ruth Berman for Inside Star Trek number 3 during the time of the production. Even after we get the script, we're concerned. It may reflect something as an antagonism, but it isn't antagonism. It's simply wanting it to be right, and as a result, we sometimes have to fight a few fights to get it that way. The problems with the previous episode script and the involvement of the Idic medallion. You may recall that from my stream on the last episode. Signaled to many in the cast that Roddenberry had effectively abandoned them. It also shook their confidence in Fred Freiberger, and there were a few areas in the script for the empath that the three principals wanted changed. Comparison of the shooting script and the filmed episode showed that the changes were minor. One scene as scripted had Spock deliver a judo chop to one of the Vians, and Nimoy wanted to apply the nerve pinch instead, but this time administered to the Vian's forearm, or Vian's forearm. I keep saying it wrong. This time to the Vian's forearm, causing him to drop his weapon. Okay. Nimoy later said Spock was sort of uncharted territory. He needed somebody to be on the job every day coming up with new ideas. It's not like you're playing some kind of recognizable human being. We're in new territory here. While the discussions continued at 9:45 a.m., the company used the wasted time to get in by making its scheduled midday move to stage 10. The sequences planned for the bridge earlier that morning would have to wait. Stage 10 was dressed as a desert like planet, plus, there was the interior of the scientific prefab hut. The beam down from the teaser was filmed first, with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy entering the hut. Next, while still in the same set, the attempted escape as Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Jim flee from the mouth of the cave and run to the hut. Kirk tries to buy the others time by distracting the Vians. Next, the company moved to the set for the interior of the hut research station. The schedule had planned that the balance of the teaser be filmed, wrapping this set up, but expectations fell short. DeForest Kelly suffered back spasms on this day, and a doctor had to be called to the set, and Kelly was released early for a trip to a physical therapist. Even with the various problems, Ehrman finished his day almost on schedule and barely into overtime. The bridge scene still needed to be made up, plus another page of script in the interior of the hut that required Kelly's participation. These would have to wait until the end of the production. So, day two, the company began 5 days of production at Paramount's massive marathon stage, now dressed as the surrealistic black limbo of the underground chamber. Guest star Katherine Hage said it was like being in Never Never Land. There was a huge cyclorama that went all around the entire studio, right up against the walls, and that, along with the floors and ceilings, was painted a flat black. So it looked like we were out in space. Everyone had to wear little booties so they wouldn't mark up the paint. We only put our shoes on when we started to shoot. Ehrman said, my memory was that the stylized approach was pretty much dictated by the powers that be. I don't think I had a whole lot to say about it. The only place that I kind of exerted some influence was with Catherine Hayes and a couple of the other actors, but I didn't have control over what the look was supposed to be. Ehrman shot the script in sequence, beginning at the start of Act 1, where Kirk, Spock, and McCoy wake up to find themselves in the black void. Spock gets a life reading and they follow it to their first meeting with Jim. Per Bob Justman's suggestions, Spock attempts to form a mind link with Jim, and then the Vians appear. This was as far as Ehrman got, covering 5.5 pages. Then there were more medical problems. Carl Daniels, the sound mixer, was the first to be affected, as he suffered a toothache and had to leave the set. By 4 p.m., Catherine Hayes was released because she was suffering from migraines. And then shortly after that, Kelly was sent home again, still suffering from back pain. And then Shatner and Nimoy had to be sent home because apparently there had been bad food served from the lunch truck that day. Nimoy had been vomiting, and Shatner also felt ill. So production was shut down at 4:45 p.m. Ehrman was now a day and a half behind. So, what do we got? So Rogue says, as you know, John Byrne is a TOS fan. Yeah, he is. He does those kind of photo comics where he uses image from the show. And hey, J Man's here. Hey, J Man. Thanks for showing up, buddy. Appreciate it. And yes, yes, please do hit the like. Oh, God, I always forget that. Hit the like. Hit the like. I always wait till right at the end to say that. Oh, yeah, hit the like. And Rogue says Hayes's outfit was amazing. Yeah, it is very it is interesting. The color, Star Trek, this original series, it just had so much bright color in it. I think that's one of the things that makes it so appealing. All the bright lighting on the sets and everything. And J-Man says, I better not hear any Kirk shit talking. Okay. You may hear a little. You may hear a little, J-Man. Let's see. Okay, so can't stay but wanted to say hello. Well, thanks for stopping by anyway, buddy. Yeah, the photo comics. Yeah, those are kind of cool. Okay. Where was I here? Okay. Yeah, so lots of health problems on this second day of shooting, so it puts them further behind. So, and was this a Friday? Yeah, this was a Friday. So everyone had over the weekend to recover. So they resumed on Monday, again on the big Paramount stage. But while they continued filming, so did the injuries. Boom operator Bob Cake injured his hand and had to be sent to the hospital. Regardless, the Act One scenes continued as the Vians made themselves known and threw a force beam around the landing party. On his first day playing a Vian, Alan Bergman said, quote, "It took 3 hours every morning to get into the rubberized makeup. Willard Sage and I made a pretty picture drinking lunch through a straw in the Paramount commissary. After lunch, Jim healed the wound on Kirk's forehead. Let's see. I think we need to. Yeah, so I think that's in the here, maybe. Oh, okay. No, I'm sorry. That's wrong when it was back here. Huh. Okay. Well, I'll find it eventually. Well, crapola. Well, I'm not finding the scene where she heals him. I may go back the hard way then. I guess we go the. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, where she heals his forehead. And RTNZ says, wow, few things can derail a production faster than food poisoning. Yeah, yeah, food poisoning or just like a cold or some sort of illness that's kind of running through everybody. Um, you remember, of course, like on, I don't know all movies this has happened, but of course that happened on Raiders of the Lost Ark, where I think there was one point where everybody was getting sick, when they were in Cairo and they were filming those fight scenes in the streets and everything. Okay, next the four captives begin their journey through the dark passageways. Then the lab scenes, they were passed over because they would require a set change. So the next scenes filmed took us back to the area where Jim was found, where Kirk was returned after being tortured, and Jim heals him again. Whenever I read Jim, I keep wanting to say Gene. There was more to film on this set, but Ehrman had to stop for the day. The production was now about a half a day behind schedule. Let's see, and then the next day they filmed mostly Act Three as McCoy puts Kirk to sleep with his hypo spray. Then Kirk says it is now his command decision, which upsets McCoy. And then Jim touches Spock, and then the doctor uses his hypo spray to knock Spock out to help connect with the noble sacrifice of his character. Let me get to that scene here. Yeah, here we go. Where he zaps Kirk and Spock. And then he agrees to basically sacrifices himself for them. So to help connect with the noble sacrifice his character was making, DeForest Kelley turned to the classics with a quote from our author H.L. Mencken, which is, quote, "If after I depart this vale you ever remember me and have thought to please my ghost, forgive some sinner and wink your eye at some homely girl." Interviewed on the set of The Empath for the 1968 fanzine Star Trek, Inside Star Trek, Kelly said, quote, "I keep this quote stuck here in the script because every now and then I refer to it to try and keep my eye on the road." The last scenes shot on this day were of Kirk's awakening and setting off with Spock and Jim to find McCoy. Okay, we'll skip to day 6. So, day 6, work continued on the Vian's lab as McCoy, without Jim's help, faces certain death. Beyond injuries and illness, the demanding makeup and stop frame camera effects devoured a great deal of time on the sets. Because, they had scenes when Jim heals people, of course, there's, the sort of stop, start of the camera as the injuries slowly disappear. Like Lon Chaney, when he did his makeup, where they'd do a bit of the makeup stop, then put a bit more makeup, that sort of stop motion effect. Catherine Hayes said, quote, "During the transformation scenes where I'm taking on Dr. Kelly's wounds, they strapped my arms onto this tilt board. My head was in a certain position and I couldn't move. And then little by little, makeup was added as they filmed each application. And then for me, the challenge was, of course, that I had no lines. So all I had was my face and what I could do with it." Yeah. Ehrman said, quote, "She did a very good job, for a girl who was that pretty. It seems to me that she was eager to be directed, and I was eager to have a chance to do a little directing because I certainly wasn't having any luck with Shatner or Nimoy." Alan Bergman said, quote, "Working with Ms. Hayes was a pleasure." And again, he played one of the aliens. "Working with Miss Hayes was a pleasure. Mr. Shatner and Mr. Nimoy seemed to be in conflict. They struggled constantly over better camera positions and made life difficult for the director." Shatner and Nimoy continued to direct themselves and spoil the experience for Ehrman. He said, quote, "I just remembered that I was really disappointed in Leonard. I had known him from before when we were both young actors. We had studied with acting coach Jeff Corey at the same time. We were around the West Hollywood theater scene at the same time, so I was really looking forward to doing the show and working with him. But the role of an episodic director is not a very creative one. I likened it at one point to saying that you're kind of sweeping the shit under the carpet. You're not really able to make creative choices. The only time you're really creative in episodic television is if you do the pilot. But nobody was like Bill and Leonard. I don't remember any other actors absolutely saying what those guys said, which was, 'Oh no, my character just wouldn't do that.' That was kind of the ultimate put down for a director." Let's see here. Okay. So, with the mini revolt that had begun the production and the numerous injuries and illnesses and the stop frame shots with makeup application, uh, the show went over one day over or longer than it should have. But because of all the things that had happened, Ehrman wasn't blamed for it. So they ended the production on a Friday. And actually, this Friday was also the last day of Jerry Finnerman, the cinematographer's this was his last day on the show and his final episode. The talented cinematographer was moving on to greener pastures and feature films. Finnerman had been the director of photography on Star Trek since the Corbomite maneuver and was the prime architect for the show's visual signature style. And now, at the completion of this episode, he was handing the torch over to his camera operator, Al Francis. Finnerman's talent and vision can be appreciated here one last time. The orange skies create another unique and startling world for us to behold, as he did in Metamorphosis. Or as he did in Metamorphosis, a wide angle lens is used to make the distances seem immense. and Finnerman carefully used rock formations to cover the limitations of the set. The Empath would also be the last job for John Erman on Star Trek. Even though the producers, cast, and crew were impressed by it, Erman later said, quote, "It's funny because when I left, Bill and Leonard said, 'Well, you'll be back soon.' And I said, 'No, I won't.' And they said, 'What do you mean?' And I said, 'I'll never do another episode of this show. I don't like working with you, and I'll tell anybody who wants to know.' It seems to me that I also went up to the office and I told Bobby and Freddie, quote, 'I haven't enjoyed this. I like you guys, but goodbye. I'm done.' I was pretty angry when I left. It was just a demeaning experience." And RRT says those are. Oh, sorry, I hit the wrong one. Says those are some serious craniums. Yeah, like I say, they look very much like aliens off of the uh, Twilight Zone or Outer Limits to me. And also, of course, they also are evocative of the Telosians. Rogue says, "Wow, yeah, yeah, the guy didn't mince words, did he?" Well, I mean, it seems like by all accounts that Star Trek was a pretty demanding show to work on in a number of ways, and that's why, to me, really, them uh, not bringing Lucas back, because he ran over. I don't know. Seems like you got a guy who knows the show, but I don't know. Anyway, this is stuff that happened 60 years ago. I'm not gonna go over it in too much detail. All right, so with the added day of production, uh, the empath the empath managed to stay close to budget and only exceeded the budget by $3,458. The deficit for the season at this point was now $9,017 or 61,000 in 2014, which today would be, I don't know what, 120,000 probably. Now, again, much like with Spock's brain, Spock's brain, of course, is like often cited as the worst episode. But if you watched my stream on that episode was actually the highest rated of the season so far. It actually won its time slot, which Star Trek usually didn't do. It was usually second. And wouldn't you know it, the Empath became the second episode of the season to win its time slot. It also came in first. Again, an episode that I think most would say isn't really one of the show's better episodes. So it's kind of funny how that works. But in the first half hour, Star Trek had a 33% audience share, putting it first ahead of Judd for the Defense at 30% and the Friday Night Movie at 22%. The Friday Night Movie usually won. So what was the movie? So the movie that night was a 1966 spy thriller called The Defector, which starred Montgomery Clift. And it's funny because The Defector was an episode of The Next Generation too, wasn't it? And yeah, I guess that didn't go over well. And then in the second half hour, it again was first with a 34% audience share. So funny how that works. The Spock's Brain, at least so far, Spock's Brain and the Empath are the highest rated episodes. Okay, John Erman said, quote, "I was never really into the world of science fiction as a fan. However, I've got to tell you in all the shows I've done since then, and some of them were fairly successful in terms of honors, the ones people always ask me about is Star Trek. And it was one of my least favorite jobs. I didn't like Bill and Leonard. They were arrogant and they were really unpleasant to people like me, the guest directors, and it was not a positive experience." Joyce Musket said, quote, "When I saw it, there were a lot of changes, but essentially the storyline of Jim learning something is the same, and the idea of the work of the Stark setting and four characters interacting was still there, so I couldn't find fault with it. I was very satisfied." Alan Bergman said, quote, "Given the minimal sets and the ludicrous pajama-like costumes of the regulars, the episode was quite successful in text and production." Faint praise if ever I heard it. DeForest Kelly said, quote, "I thought it was so dramatically done. The entire stage was blacked out and black curtains and everything was done in pin spots in the lighting. I just thought it was so unique in production value and the cinematography on it. You'd look around and you'd think, gee, what a wild way to shoot a show. Actress Catherine Hayes said, quote, Star Trek was television that taught you something about life, about how one ought to behave, and above all, about compassion. On a more personal note, she said, quote, I just had the most fun doing that episode. I worked a lot with DeKelly, and you'd have to go a long way to find someone nicer. Shatner and Nimoy were lovely to me. I couldn't have asked for better treatment, and we had such fun. As far as I'm concerned, it was really one of the most pleasant things I've ever done. Set director John Dwyer said, quote, The Empath was a good show. I thought it had excellent acting. The young lady in it was awfully good. It was an inexpensive one to do because of the stark sets, so it didn't cost a lot, but it turned out very good. And a proud Gene Roddenberry said, I love The Empath. Okay. All right, so that'll do it for this one. All right, guys. So at this point, um, this is going to be my last Trek talk for a while. I'm going to have to take a break from the channel again for a while. I'll try to keep doing them Earth's Mightiest Mondays, at least maybe for a few more weeks, but I'll probably have to stop doing that too here soon. Because, as I've mentioned, I'm doing a master's program and I'm going to be starting up my classes here again soon. And I've got stuff I've got to take care of before the semester starts. Because once the semester starts, I'm barely going to have time to sleep. So I will be stopping the Trek Talks here for the time being. Like I say, I did want to do um, Axonar, but I guess that'll just have to wait. We'll have to wait and see how that whole legal issue shakes out. Our TNZ says, looking forward to seeing you when you have more times. Cheers, mate. Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Yeah, so it's going to be about 3 months. So probably around the beginning of December, I'll probably start up again. And I'll see out the rest of this third season, hopefully. So again, please do hit the like button if you haven't already. And what else? What else? Yeah, so I hope to be back for Earth's Mightiest Mondays this coming Monday. We'll see. And I guess that'll be it, everybody. Thanks for being here. And I hope to see you maybe over in the chat on J-Man's channel. And I'll see you guys then. Wagner says, thanks. Good luck with your studies. Appreciate it, man. Thank you. And have a good night, everybody. See you later.